Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on POD TV. My name is Sasha Star, and of course, happy, wealthy, and healthy New Year to all. And today, our guests are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Thank you. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Hello to everyone. Glad to be here today with you.
Okay, and we may have a few more guests who will join us because it's just our special show. It's the last program of 2024, and hopefully 2025 will be finally a year where Ukrainian people will get its well-deserved freedom, and this horrible war will be over. And it's horrible in many respects. And the fact is that Ukraine should have won this war 2 years ago, and unfortunately that didn't happen. And now, of course, it's too late to lament about it. However, Jonathan, what's your opinion on that?
Thank you for that grenade there. He ends the year tossing me the grenade. Okay. Well, it ends. Yes, the Russian-Ukrainian war for the Ukrainians was a year of missed opportunities. It was a war of missed opportunities, but not because of anything the Ukrainians did wrong necessarily. When they launched their first counteroffensive, as you recall, back in 2023, the one that had to be cut off because it really did not have the sufficient aid from the West to generate the kind of offensive power that would have been needed to break through the Russian defenses. And as such, the Ukrainians took unnecessarily heavy casualties in trying to make limited gains. However, in 2024, all through this war, really, the Russians have been taking exorbitant casualties relative to the Ukrainians. And depending on whom you ask and what estimates you use, the Russian casualties at a minimum have been well over 700,000, and they have easily made this the most costly war for Russia since World War II. It greatly exceeds, as you pointed out before, by almost a factor of 10 the number of casualties they took in Afghanistan. And so and there are numerous signs, both economically as well as logistically, in terms of the weapons systems that they've been losing, that have been defeated in their use against Western arms. All of these indicate that the Russians really cannot seriously prosecute a war in 2025 and hope to achieve what they have stated they wanted to do at the outset. They cannot hope to achieve the conquest of Ukraine. That can only be given to them by the West, and which the West is not about to do. And even the incoming Trump administration has given indications that they are not going to toss Ukraine aside or sacrifice Ukraine for the sake of attaining an illusionary peace, because that would be tantamount to what Chamberlain did at Munich in 1938. And it would not buy a permanent peace. It would merely postpone the next war for a relatively short period of time. The Russians have indicated what their ambitions have been. Well, welcome there, Steve. And have indicated what their ambitions have been all along. And they keep making noises about expanding their conquests beyond Ukraine. Well, this has shocked all of Europe, all the NATO allies, into realizing that Russia has to be stopped here. They have to be decisively defeated and made to recognize that they will not achieve their goals of reestablishing a Russian empire, period. And that has to be the resolve of the NATO alliance for 2025, as well as the incoming Trump administration. There are very good signs that the Trump administration, his cabinet, they realize this. And even of course, the outgoing Biden administration has been rushing all of the military aid that they can possibly get out the door to aid Ukraine. And so actually, this works in favor of the incoming Trump administration because it gives them a foundation to play off of. It says, well, if you thought that was bad, Russia, if you don't make a serious peace with Ukraine, it's going to get worse for you because we will provide more aid and better aid.
Interestingly, first of all, Steve, welcome to the show. And I have a question for you. Obviously, that was very, I wouldn't say powerful, but at least practical slogan for Trump that he would finish the war in 24 hours. And do you think, Steve, was he really sincere in his desire to do so, or it was just exactly that, the slogan to win the election, or both? What do you think? Hello, Steve?
He's waiting for the grenade to land in his hands.
I see. Okay, well, Steve will think over how to reply. Ivan, maybe we will start with your video.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that despite all the difficulties for Ukraine this year, we survived. Ukraine is still standing, and despite the blackouts, the constant challenge of Ukrainian cities, Ukrainians are those who are not involved into the battles. They're trying to live their peaceful life where they can, and that's what about my video for today. So we can just watch it right now.
Okay.
I'm not afraid anymore. I said I'm not afraid anymore. Do you hear me? I'm not afraid anymore.
Thank you. Very uplifting video. Actually, I'm thinking about that. Ukraine is probably the only country in the world, or at least in Europe, that could, for 3 years, withstand Russian attacks, which include missiles and drones and just anything. Jonathan, how do you explain that Ukraine is able to withstand all that and still is undefeated? And in First World War, Germany, which has not even been occupied at all, they lost the war all of a sudden.
Well, the best way that I could explain it, other than aside from divine intervention, which I do not discount, that remember that in the First World War, both sides, all of the nations of Europe, the opposing alliances, one of the most amazing and frightening things was that both sides were absolutely convinced that they had God on their side. And as a result of that, the two sides went at each other with a fervor and ferocity, believing that the other side was evil personified and that they deserved no mercy. And that resulted in a mutual slaughter on a scale heretofore never before seen in history. 37 million people would die as a result of the First World War, which they called at the time, as you know, the Great War. They thought it was the war to end all wars, the war that would usher in Christ and peace and justice and so forth. They would have been absolutely horrified if, for example, if we had a time traveler from the 21st century go back to visit them at the time of the so-called Great War, and we would have told us, "Oh, you're from the future. What does your future have to say about the Great War?" It says, "Well, we in the 21st century call the Great War by another name. We call it World War I." And they would have been absolutely horrified. You says, "You mean, yes, there will be a World War II, even more horrible." So how has Ukraine, compared to that, what Ukraine has done is comparatively easy when you look at it in historical context, because the Russians, historically, again from the Second World War, the Russians, their strong point has never been logistics. They have never been very good at logistically sustaining and supporting offensive warfare. That was clear in World War I. It was clear in World War II, also to a certain extent, because, as I pointed out before, the Soviet army was not able to sustain offenses consistently against the Germans. They would not have been able to do so had it not been for Lend-Lease from the U.S., consisting of very numerous Ford trucks, which gave them a motorized logistical system, which enabled them to sustain their offensive capabilities more easily against the Germans. And even with that, as the Soviet army attacked west, their offensives became shorter and shorter in duration. That was because even with help from the U.S., their logistical system could not sustain an offensive for very long, the farther away they got from their own supply bases. So that by war's end, in 1945, yes, they had a very powerful force, but it could not sustain an offensive for very long. They had just enough to take Berlin, but they did not have that. So now when you project this, they have not made very serious improvements in their logistical doctrine and supply capability since then. And when they began their offensive against Ukraine, while at first it looked like they were going to make great progress, pretty soon the Ukrainians were able to exploit the weaknesses which they had been familiar with for a very long time. They were able to exploit those weaknesses and frustrate the Russian offensives. And so now you have a situation where the Russians keep feeding soldiers into the meat grinder, keep feeding the North Koreans into the meat grinder. It makes no difference. The Russians simply do not have a robust enough logistical capability to be able to sustain offensives, let alone a general war, for a significant period of time. The Ukrainians, to their credit, have been clever enough to exploit these weaknesses and to improvise as needed. And so they have been able to frustrate the Russian offensives and extract from them a very high price. And all the Ukrainians have been asking all along, give us the weapons, give us the freedom to use what you're giving us so that we can hurt the Russians to the maximum extent possible and force them to recognize that conquest of Ukraine is simply out of the question. So,
and I just wanted to add to those lessons from history. Thank you, Jonathan. That the difference between the Germany in First World War in Ukraine, there are actually two great differences. First of all, that Ukraine is supported by our Western allies, whether Germany in the end of the First World War stood almost alone when Russia left the war, and Germany remained almost on themselves against the France, Great Britain, United States joining the war, and other countries. And the second great difference is that Ukrainian people are really inventive in this war. We had no naval fleet. but we invented sea drones, which destroyed the quarter of Russian Black Fleet. Russia is destroying Ukrainian power generation, and the Ukrainians are developing decentralized power generation. Ukrainian citizens, they're massively building solar panels on their roofs to generate power by solar power, and Ukrainian businesses are building gas-powered power stations, and everyone is united in just in surviving this war and making our life as comfortable as it could be. So thanks to Ukrainian innovativeness, we in many aspects overcomes Russians. For instance, the mass usage of drones on the battlefield, of kamikaze drones, not only the naval drones, but of kamikaze drones, of rover drones. Actually, recently we had a first unmanned battle in Ukraine when unmanned land drones defeated the Russians' fortifications and thrown out Russians from one of the regions in Kharkiv Oblast. So it's also about the way how Ukrainians are going in this war.
I would like to mention one interesting factor. I always hate when people in the programs sometimes saying about Hitler that he did some good things though too. For example, he did highway system in Germany, which still survives up today, and it was very, very good, well thought, well engineered, executed.
Yeah, they also gave him credit for inventing the Volkswagen Beetle.
That's right. Yeah, well, never mind that
Old people's car. Yeah,
about 50 million people perished during Second World War, but the highway system was still good, and there were some other probably good things about it. Now, to say about Putin that he did some good things while being a war criminal and probably surpassed.
That's pushing it.
That's right. But now I was thinking about something what Putin indeed invented. One thing he figured out quite a while ago that the most despiseful things for the Western people is the war, where they have to participate, or even threat of the war, where Western people would have to participate. And nothing is for them uglier than that. So Putin, I don't know when exactly he discovered that, but he was definitely given hints by the West, starting with Crimea and go forward from that point on. So he figured out if not only even he starts war with NATO or, God forbid, United States, but he will hint that that's coming, that's unavoidable. That will make Western powers meek and will try find a way, well, similar maybe to Munich 38, something to avoid war at all costs or appease the dictator. And Putin, I think he mastered that strategy. So while being economically, his Russian economy is probably around 1/40th economy. It's a joke. Yet, because of the bluff and very masterful using of this circumstantial situation, but again, it could be used only while the war is on, because if it's a peace, it doesn't work completely. It's a joke. I mean, he will be a fool to try to do something. But during the war, well, the threat of using, for example, nuclear weapons or escalating or anything else. Look at what's happened to Joe Biden, for example. So this is kind of a making of a sensible strategy with very limited economical and war military capacity, he could get Russia into, oh, I forgot about forming this alliance with North Korea and possibly China and Iran. So he's now coming to the table, negotiate against all West, never mind Ukraine, but all the West, including United States and Donald Trump and whoever else is there. He's a midget, he's a nothing, and yet he came to the table. So why wouldn't we admit that Putin mastered a certain strategy of intimidating the West with a war, or at least possibility?
Well, Sasha, that makes perfect sense, because what Putin's approach has been is really an outgrowth of what I researched, the Soviet view of U.S. strategic doctrine during the Cold War. They saw the reaction or the accommodation of Western strategy to the goals of Soviet foreign policy. They saw that as the result of a forced response on the part of the Soviet Union, a forced response by the West to the growth of Soviet nuclear power. And the implication of the Soviet perception was the more that they increased their nuclear arsenal, the quality and quantity of it, the more that the West would be forced to accommodate itself to the goals of Soviet foreign policy. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, however, this perception carried over, because Boris Yeltsin, as you recall, in a speech to the Russian Duma in 1994, said, I quote, "The only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons." Now, in a certain sense, Yeltsin gave the game away, because that is the centerpiece of Russian strategic thinking, that because of its nuclear arsenal, it has political leverage, not just great power status, and it can use this nuclear arsenal to intimidate. They call their nuclear forces ustrashenia, intimidation forces. They don't call them, help me with that word, shterzhvania, to restrain or hold in check. That's what they interpreted the United States as their deterrence forces initially. But they also claim that U.S. nuclear forces are also ustrashenia, intimidation forces. And so what the Russians are doing is they are trying to gain the maximum possible value from their nuclear arsenal as not only a symbol of their great power status, which is what the only real claim they have to great power status, but also as a means for accomplishing their foreign policy goals by intimidating the West with the threat of escalation. And they are relying on Western fears, U.S. fear of escalation and its consequences. They are counting on that in order to be able to make gains and extract concessions from the West. So you've noticed that the Russians have been doubling down on their nuclear arsenal and the threat of its use all during the Russian-Ukrainian war. And so what I've been recommending on previous programs is that the West band together and form to complement the European Sky Shield Initiative, eventually to create the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix, WISDOM. By doing this and capitalizing on U.S. technological superiority, the U.S. and its NATO allies will be able to neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power in its own perception. That's the long-term solution. Short-term solution, use the aid that is being given to Ukraine to bolster to the maximum extent possible its ballistic missile defenses. Give it a very good, strong and robust ballistic missile defense that essentially will neutralize Russia's attempts to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure. And if you can also then, in future years during the Trump administration, hopefully upgrade the Space Force to create a space fleet armed with lasers capable of shooting down nuclear missiles in their boost phase. Once that is accomplished, Russia and its nuclear-armed allies, China, North Korea, or even Iran, they are all neutralized. And that will provide a very sound basis for strategic stability for the remainder of the 21st century.
Jonathan, of course, there are a lot of technical and logistical problems of creating such initiative, and numerous of those were mentioned actually today on our morning show, that feasibility of men staying in space for so long time,
Right.
and
That's a very telling point, because what we have learned, Sasha, from our experience in space thus far, you cannot have what we have learned essentially is that the Space Force, an upgraded space fleet, would be operating essentially in low Earth orbit,
yes,
geosynchronous orbit to a certain extent, and on the moon. You establish a moon base. That's really the limit. Never mind trying to establish a base on Mars. That's irrelevant to the goals of U.S. national security at this point. It's not logistically possible. And in terms of human engineering, human behavior, it makes a Mars mission very problematic. Something that Elon Musk has not taken into account yet. He treats it as solely an engineering problem. No, it's a human nature problem. But in any case, the experience that we have derived from our experience thus far is that people can really, in space, 6 months is a practical limit. You have to change out the crews every 6 months in a space fleet.
Maybe even earlier.
But 6 months after a year in space, they've noticed that people, when they get back to Earth after having spent a year in Earth orbit, they have trouble learning to walk again. Their bodies have to adjust, and people overlook this. This naturally limits the length of tours that a Space Force crew could realistically spend in space without suffering long-term medical complications.
There is a question of radiation, of course.
Yes, that too. And you would have to improve the radiation shielding. You have to limit the time of exposure. And interestingly enough, one very interesting material that blocks most, if not all, of solar radiation is gold. If you could have even a very thin lining of gold on the interior of a spacecraft, that would knock out most of the radiation that the crews would experience, which is very good. Of course, it also puts gold at a real premium. But
that's where gold has advantage over Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, real big advantage. You can't use Bitcoin to screen radiation, but can't do that. Yes, Ivan.
Yeah, but I think that the future space operations they would be mostly unmanned because with the development of artificial intelligence, it's a matter of couple years when the technologies will allow the complete unmanned crews to be operating on space missions, and that's probably why Elon Musk is, beside the SpaceX, he's also focused on developing Tesla robots, which would allow to manage such.
You could have AI robot crews going to Mars to help establish the infrastructure for a possible human mission to Mars in the future. But first you have
being permanently on Earth's orbit or on Moon to manage the defense operations, because you will not have to change robot crews every 6 months.
Just make sure they've got a reliable energy supply. That's about it.
Yeah.
Also, they have to think about opening offices, selling tickets. Somebody flying from Moon to Mars, for example, they have to pay money and they have to get their tickets available, and they have to figure out how to do it.
They better have some serious luxury accommodations on the Moon in order to make that feasible. They better make that look like Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, they can have some equivalent of 5-star hotel with a nice swimming pool, good food, entertainment, and
you'd have to watch the movie. You'd have to watch the movie Total Recall.
Total Recall, absolutely.
The old one with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, it's one of those movies that you can watch actually more than once for sure.
Oh yes.
I like to watch movies, something like Doctor Strangelove, for example. Anytime
How I
somebody,
learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. Okay.
absolutely, I love it. I love that movie. So we are moving actually in a few hours. Ivan, you will first one here who will celebrate New Year.
Yeah.
So what's your prediction for a New Year and what do you think will happen?
Um, Yeah, my own predictions are that the 25 year will be better for Ukraine than the 24th one because Ukraine was preparing for the worst. Actually, after the probable win of Donald Trump on presidential elections, and that he would stop the military support for Ukraine, and it was one of the possible scenarios, and Ukrainian government, Ukrainian officials were preparing for such scenario. But what we're seeing that Donald Trump says that he will not stop military support for Ukraine, and probably would those military support we received this year from United States, from President Biden administration, and future support from Trump administration, Ukraine will have more possibilities on the battlefield. And I hope that Ukrainian forces were preparing, and that probably we will see next counter offensive operation of Ukrainian forces, because that year Kursk operation, it was pure improvisation actually, and it was unpredicted. It was a great surprise, not only for Russians but for Ukrainians themselves. But the year we were talking about the 25 year as a year of possible Ukrainian next big counteroffense. So I think that the next year will be better for Ukraine. And there is another major point that Russian economy is getting worse and worse. Ruble is already more than 100 for $1, and they have problems by paying to their mercenaries. The last news from Russia are about that Putin canceled one-time payments for the prisoners who decide to sign contracts. That shows that they're becoming lack of money, and they have no possibility to pay their prisoners anymore. Hopefully, in several months, they will also don't have money to pay regular Russians who sign the contracts, and when Russia will lack of money, then they will not have any more people resources to continue this war. And from other point, beside their economy resources are exhausting, their military resources are exhausting as well. Analysts confirm that the remaining number of weapons, old Soviet weapons stored on the Russian warehouses is decreasing, and on some of them is less than a quarter of the weapons left, which were on the moment of full-scale invasion to this war. Russia already lost almost 10,000 of tanks in this war. It's unpredictable. Jonathan said that they lost more than 700,000 of soldiers killed and severely wounded, and more than half of those losses they were during this year 2024, and it's kind that Russia put everything on stacks before the Trump will will sit again in the White House, and they've put all their efforts in order to get more and more Ukrainian territories, to occupy more and more Ukrainian territories, and their stake seems to be lost, because Trump is not going to make Ukraine for a quick peace. I hope Trump is supporting the conditions of peace that that lay besides the international law. And he will not accept the Russian requirements to give them the occupied territories, to demilitarize Ukraine, to restrict the number of Ukrainian armed forces, and all that bluff, because it will open a Pandora box for any other countries to achieve their goals by the military force.
Yes, I agree. Ivan, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I would like to ask Steve what you think will happen next year based on what you heard.
Happy New Year to everybody. And I'm going to be here for a few minutes,
Thanks.
but Sasha, it's so good to see you. And I had some technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think as it relates to Ukraine, I think that what we'll probably see is the war continuing. What'll be interesting, I will give Biden credit. I think President Biden has to be given credit for unifying the European countries and continuing to support Ukraine. Now the question becomes, will Trump use it as an opportunity to perhaps try to end the war, but recognize Ukraine as an independent state? I doubt it, but trying to be optimistic about the situation. I think that the Trump foreign policy will revert back to being more isolationist. I think he really wants to have NATO pay more of their fair share. I think the economics plan, I call it deportation, deregulation, and lower taxes. But it could be Trump using it as a negotiating chip so he can stand down countries like Mexico and others. And so only time will tell what 2025 will bring, as Donald Trump is now soon to be the 47th president of the United States. Still can't get over the fact that he won, but he won the popular vote, he won the electoral vote, and I think it's going to be interesting to see now how he governs. The only good news is it'll be his last term, and after 2027 is over, we'll be looking at getting ready for the next round of elections. So it'll be Vance versus whoever the Democrats can find. But I continue to support Ukraine, and I hope we can continue to make sure that they're victorious.
Be careful what you wish for.
Thanks, Steve. And you, Jonathan.
So, in fact, what you could well find if the Democrats don't do some serious rethinking, they may find themselves being confronted with, following 4 years of Trump, with 8 years of Vance, followed by 8 years of DeSantis, and after that, by that time, Barron Trump will be 38 years old, and he'll be able to run for president. And you'll be having Barron Trump, and you'll be going into the 21st year, the second half of the 21st century under Republican rule. Wow, Democrats will be really hating life by that time.
Yeah, there won't be a party left.
Yeah,
they're going in that direction now. So, in any case,
yeah.
well,
yes. Sorry.
Well, I wanted to have everybody happy and prosperous and wealthy and healthy New Year, and all the best for Ukraine and its heroic people. Thank you so much, everybody, for today's program. And Slava Ukraini, glory to you.
Slava Ukraine. Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.